Welcome to One Good Thing Media, your official podcast review channel. We search the vast digital landscape on a daily basis to discover the best shows that podcasters have to offer. Are you ready to discover new favorites to add to your playbook? Stay tuned and listen to host Gerald Spears' latest podcast reviews.
Hello, fellow podcast lovers. This is Gerald Spear, and I am the host and creator of One Good Thing Media. Welcome, everybody. This is Season 2, Episode 12. Each week, our podcast is themed around a specific genre, and Episode 12 is about fraud, specifically outrageous corporate fraud. And in the mix, I am also going to be interviewing Richard D. Bailey. And Richard D. Bailey is a corporate savior, so to speak, and that's what I call him anyway, who goes into troubled companies and helps resurrect them back to solvency and to have satisfied their creditors and kind of calm down their shareholders. He is a very interesting character because what I'm mostly focusing on in this interview is the fact that Richard D. Bailey went into a corporation to do his usual admirable work, and in the process he discovered a major fraud going on, and it totaled in the millions and millions of dollars. So Richard actually ended up being a mole for the FBI and providing them with evidence and doing a little stealthiness along the way to create a paper trail that the FBI could add to their dossier to arrest the most egregious criminals of this corporation. Before we get going, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to please follow our podcast and also to give us a 5-star rating if you feel that our show warrants it. I'm asking you to do this because honestly, it is the best way at this stage of our game to attract thousands and perhaps even millions of listeners. I want to thank everybody who's already done this. Thank you for supporting us. And now I say, on with the show. My first review today is actually an episode of Odd Lots. And Odd Lots is a Bloomberg podcast, and they do a lot of, I don't know, if you're not interested in it, it seems actually pretty mundane, like the anonymous meme account chronicling credit market craziness, or how Ukraine delivers mail during a war. You know, things that, okay, I mean, it's interesting, it's informative, but my brain shuts down pretty quick after I try and listen to one of their episodes. I'm just not into it. But, there's always a but, isn't there? There is one episode that was published in May of 2019. The title is Behind the Scenes of Financial Fraud. It sounds pretty dry, right? But it's not. It's about a company called Crazy Eddie that was wildly popular on the East Coast, actually the tri-state area, which would be New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. It was founded by the Antar family. That would be Father Sam M. Antar, Eddie Antar, and eventually they brought in their cousin, who is also named Sam Antar, as their CFO. I'm going to play a clip now from Sam Antar, the CFO of Crazy Eddie, and how they committed their crimes. Here we go.
Where did Crazy Eddie come from? I know, you were its CFO, and so obviously intimately involved with the fraud, but what's the history of this electronics dealership?
Crazy Eddie's was a single-store retailer starting in 1969. It was originally known as ERS Electronics, doing business as Sights and Sounds. It was run by my cousin Eddie, his dad Sam M. Antar, and my cousin Ronnie Gindi. Originally, we were just a run-of-the-mill electronics retail store engaged in skimming and insurance fraud, that sort of stuff. You have to understand something about Crazy Eddie's is that, especially if you're in a cash-based business, sales tax is a license to steal.
Just a little later in the interview, Sam talks about how criminals view situations much different than law-abiding citizens. And there's a few tips in here that we should all listen to.
To understand crime, you have to understand the human element around you. Ethics, morality, the presumption of innocence, our laws, our rules, those limit the behavior of decent people. For me as a criminal, I don't have those limitations on my behavior when I was practicing crime. So your good nature, your ethics, your commitments to society, that limits your behavior but makes the criminal's behavior easier. That makes the criminal's execution of their crime easier.
And there you have it. Their MO, whether they were dealing with auditors from the government, insurance agencies that were investigating claims, or the public at large, they operated on that realization that they thought differently at that time about what was good to do and what was not. And for whatever reason, the insurance companies didn't question the fact that they had so many floods and claims. And as Sam reveals in this particular interview, they actually kept quote-unquote water damage goods, and every once in a while they would go and get them out of the warehouse, lay them around, create a leaky faucet or whatever they had to do, and they kept claiming the same products over and over as being flood damaged. At the end, Crazy Eddie was big enough that it actually went public. They had 40 stores in the tri-state area, which I mentioned earlier was New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. But rather than giving away the entire episode, please listen to the episode on Odd Lots that was dropped in May 2019. And by the way, I looked up Sam Antar, and he is still living. So with any luck at all, I will snag an interview with him in the future. And now it's time to talk about Samuel Bankman-Fried. Honestly, the only people who have not heard of Sam Bankman-Fried either live in a cave with no internet or under a rock. He is the famous crypto kid who spouted altruism, that he was amassing money, $16 billion. Of course, it was probably all in cryptocurrency. To make the world a better place, to fix things in the world that needed to be fixed. Sam was endorsed by enthusiastic celebrities who were touting the cryptocurrency that he was dealing with. And also, we were having Super Bowl ads, for God's sakes, where they were talking about, it's the surest bet, it's the best way to go, and so forth. And celebrities like Larry David and even Tom Brady were publicly touting this currency. In fact, Tom Brady was paid a reported $20 million for 20 hours work to promote cryptocurrency and, of course, Sam Bankman-Fried's company. Even former President Bill Clinton stood on stage with him, hand in hand, of course that is figuratively, promoting what Sam was doing. They could all see that his money was going to go into their organizations and their foundations, and the greed just seemed to overtake an awful lot of people. And on November 17th, 2022, FTX officially collapsed along with 101 debtors who were all included in the Chapter 11. In other words, they wanted to make themselves not liable for their financial ruin of many people. Now, it's interesting enough that Sam Bankman was such a poor bookkeeper. In fact, his books sort of looked like you would imagine a frat boy's bedroom. Socks tossed there in the corner, dirty shorts in the other corner. He had no idea where his money was. It was just a mess. And plus, of course, he commingled funds. He took funds from FTX, moved them over to Alameda because Alameda was in trouble. If it hadn't been so serious, it would have been comical. It was like something you would see on a rom-com, on TV. It was terrible. There are an awful lot of podcasts that cover the Sam Bankman-Fried debacle. However, there's one that I like more than others, so I'm going to mention it. It's by Spellcaster, which is a Wondery production, and also in conjunction with Bloomberg. And it is called The Fall of Sam Bankman-Fried. It's beautifully produced. It starts before the fall and then goes on through the trial and the outcome of the trial. Very interesting. Now, the drawback is that it costs money to listen to. I'm not being cheap. I, as a podcaster and as an editor and writer, I have an awful lot of apps I have to subscribe to, and I'm sure you do too. And I don't need to pay for any more apps. I've sort of topped out on that. But I did subscribe to this one, and I was glad I did because it is such an excellent podcast. I'm going to play a clip for you. It's a little bit longer than normal for me, but it's worth it because it sets up the backdrop for Sam Bankman-Fried and how all the adoration that was thrown his way when he was on top. This takes place in the Bahamas, where Sam is located, and he is having a convention of sorts. It's really a meeting place for investors and also for people that are just praying that Sam is going to throw a few billion their way for their foundations. So here it is.
The next morning, Michael Lewis, the world-renowned business journalist, sat on stage with an awkward-looking 30-year-old guy with a mop of curly hair, wearing shorts and a baggy t-shirt.
3 years ago, nobody knew who you were. And now you're sitting on the cover of magazines and you're a gazillionaire and your
This was who people were here to see. The co-founder and CEO of FTX, one of the world's largest crypto exchanges. He was a billionaire many times over, a prolific political donor, a boundary-breaking philanthropist, and he'd done it all in just a few years.
These are you're breaking land speed records. And I don't think people are really noticing what's happened, just how dramatic the revolution has become. There's a status upheaval that's going on in the financial world, and you're sitting right in the middle of it.
Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, I mean, basically, and I think the way that sort of I approached it was like, what should the product be? Like, let's take...
Lewis has written some of the definitive business books of the past 40 years. Moneyball, Liar's Poker, and The Big Short. He has spent a lifetime sorting businesses' good guys from the charlatans. And on stage, at least, he sounded impressed by what Sam Bankman-Fried had accomplished. And Sam didn't just sit with Michael Lewis. He was everywhere. He shared the stage with former President Bill Clinton and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair.
And of course, that is just a taste of how people were treating him. And it was just amazing because I think a lot of them were there to make millions and billions of dollars by investing in Sam's companies, but also people who were there hoping that their foundations were picked for some of the donations that Sam had promised to make. So it was a real, let me see how I can say this nicely, an S show. How's that? Because it turned out that it wasn't too long after that, of course, that everything just went to hell. But at any rate, that is what I'm recommending this week. It's a fascinating story. Trust me on that one. And now, you know what time it is? It's time for my favorite part of this show, which is a one-on-one interview with Richard D. Bailey and how he ended up being a mole for the FBI. Here goes. I would like for you to meet my guest for this week, Richard D. Bailey, who assists corporations that are in financial distress and who acted as an FBI mole once after discovering major fraud in one such company. Richard has quite the story to tell and has also written a book entitled Pirate Cove, which details his experiences before, during, and after the infamous Southport Lane scandal. Hi, Richard. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Gerald. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I tell you, I just was absolutely wrapped with your book and your career, of course. And I have a lot of questions.
Well, that's okay. We can spend as much time as you like answering them. It was a very, very interesting and different experience, and I've had a lot of different and interesting experiences in my career. So.
Yeah, like how many years have you actually been doing this particular type of work?
About 35 years. I started, I graduated from college in 1980s and worked in politics actually for about 5 years, and then went to graduate school. And after I got out of graduate school, believe it or not, I tried to get a job with the CIA. I went through the recruiting process, the interview process, and all that kind of stuff. Never got a job offer. And then some guy who worked for my dad at Smith Barney, it's like 1988 at this point. It's the end of the LBO era. And he had left Smith Barney and he bought a steel company in Western Pennsylvania. And as I like to tell people, it was, the beginning of computer projections and things like that. And banks were throwing money at these types of deals. And the company was worth $6 million. They paid $8 million and it was the LBO era. So they borrowed $10 million. And in 1991, the company was in bankruptcy. So that was kind of my start. As I like to tell people, I wound up being a workout and turnaround guy, and no one grows up wanting to be a workout and turnaround guy. You just wind up being in one. I can imagine
just by reading your book that, that type of a job is not for the faint of heart.
No, you have to you have to have a certain aggressive side and a certain willingness to kind of scrap with people. And for better or for worse, I have that side of me. So
that's amazing. Well, you definitely have a complicated career from the outside looking in. And it was almost, as I was reading it, I got the impression that a lot of times it is a chess game where you're a very skilled chess player and you can move the pieces around to get to your end, but it's still there's a certain amount of uncertainty in it in any case, and they have to hire the best man for that, and obviously in many cases that would be you. But what impressed me so much about this book and about just talking to you is the fact that you have a knack for explaining what you do in what I call plain speak by making what you do understandable to the person that's outside looking in. You're talking about Wall Street and mergers and shell companies and this, that, and the other, but yet the way you explain them in the book, I go, oh, okay, I get that. From a simplistic point of view, I get that. So what do you think brought you to become involved with the infamous Southport Lane scandal, which is what your Pirate Cove book is about?
Well, I had done a deal where I raised money for a company that I was the CEO of, and the great financial crisis happened, and that company and our financial backers, we were a small company and we were, a small part of a much larger portfolio of this hedge fund in New York. And, the old saying of, when, the big company gets, a cold, gets the flu, we got pneumonia and we died. So I was literally sitting at home, licking my wounds from that experience. And I had been out of work a year. And, as I tell people, at some point, having been a workout and turnaround guy for all these years, somebody that I know comes along and has a deal that nobody else really wants to touch. And they say, let's call Bailey. He's sitting on his butt doing nothing. And, frankly, I wanted to work for a private equity firm. I tell people that this was, what they ultimately hired me for was kind of like my dream job, because, this is a private equity firm that represented that it had $1 billion with assets under management and cash to invest. It had ownership of 4 insurance companies at that point. And I was like, and it turns out that they were not very good at private equity investing. So for someone who's a workout and turnaround, these guys were a meal ticket for, the ages for me. And so they hired me. And let me also say, I also really wanted to get back into the world, to be relevant again, to get back in the flow of things. Because, there comes a time when you're sitting around at home, suddenly your phone stops ringing and, you're just not relevant to, the world that you were in before.
Well, let me just interrupt you just for one quick second, because first of all, can you explain to our audience what an equity group is?
A private equity group essentially, aggregates capital from investors, and they go and they buy companies, try to for hopefully a low price, generally with the way they model some with a lot of debt and a little bit of equity. Then they try to improve. They spend 4, 5, 6 years improving the company so that they can ultimately sell it at 2 to 10 times their original equity investment. So they have billions of capital sitting on the sidelines to do these deals, but they tend to be most private equity firms that I've worked with tend to be very rigid, very applied, very strict in how they deploy their capital.
Yes.
When I got to Southport Lane, the first thing I noticed is that there was no rules. These guys were just slinging cash around like you wouldn't believe. And, so I went and saw this company in northern New Jersey. I did due diligence on they were going to buy it. I go in and I am to meet the principals at Southport Lane for the first time. I knew one guy there. He was my good friend, Jeff. And he was the one.
That was such a character that you drew.
Oh, he's a character. He is a character.
I want to meet Jeff.
Everybody does. Everybody does. He's, he's, as they say, he's a hail fellow, hearty well met. He knows everybody. He's got one of the best Rolodexes in the world. And I had been working with him for probably, 15, 18 years at that point. We both worked at a small private equity company out in Denver together. But so I walk into, after evaluating this company in northern New Jersey, I walk in and I'm sitting there and there's all a bunch of, typical young, smart MBA types, all dressed the same, sitting around the conference table. And in walks this, kind of mess, Alexander Burns, who at the time was 26 years old, and he was the majority owner of Southport Lane.
Like you gave him a nickname of Jimmy Neutron.
Yeah, I did.
Why
that
don't you give me a little bit of a description of this?
All right. So Jimmy Neutron was a cartoon my two sons used to watch when they were younger. And it's about this super genius who kind of bumbles his way into saving the world in each episode. And, Alex Burns just reminded me of him because, he had poor social skills. And, I think when I first met him, he comes bombing into this room, and the first thing he looks at me, he goes, "Should I buy this pharmaceutical company?" I looked at him, and I'm like, "Well, doesn't say hello. There's no niceties." So I just launched into it.
He kind of lurched in too, right? He kind of
he walked super fast. He was always staring down at his phone, and you kind of expected him to walk into the door jam. So he looks over at me. He goes, "Should I buy this company, this pharmaceutical company?" And I said, "No." Everybody suddenly starts to looking at me, including my friend Jeff, who was sponsoring the deal. I didn't realize that so much, but I said no, and Burns goes, "Why?" I said, "Because you're going to lose all your money. This is a family-owned business. They don't lose a ton of money. They lose a little bit of money, but they've got a wealthy friend that's supporting them and keeps them alive. And this is just not, this is not a good deal. You're going to lose your money, and you're always, every time the family gets together for a birthday, a holiday, any sort of celebration, they're going to have a board meeting and you're not going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at me and he was like, kind of taken aback a little bit. And that was pretty much the end of the meeting.
Then he kind of just walked out. He didn't say goodbye or anything, right?
Right. And that I found that he did that. That was kind of his normal behavior. So he just walks out of the meeting. He goes, okay, we're done here. And, and that's when,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to clarify for the audience that Jeff was working for the particular company you were just talking about, and they were considering investing or buying, however you call it, into a pharmaceutical company. It was like a family-owned business. And so you went to the family-owned business to find out if it was a worthwhile endeavor, go through the books and so forth. You came back with a negative, right?
I did.
And then you had this meeting that we're just talking about.
Correct.
Okay.
So Burns, says, okay, we're done here. He walks out. The other, smart young guys, walk out. And, Jeff looks at me and goes, what are you doing? And I realized that I've just basically blown up a deal that Jeff was trying to promote. Mm-hmm. And I felt very badly because Jeff's a good friend. We've done a lot of business together. And I was like, and I told him, we met for a couple drinks afterwards. And I said, listen, I'm sorry if I, threw the truth bomb down out here. And I said, what is with this guy? And that's when I said, what's with this guy, Jimmy Neutron? And he just sat there. He goes, yeah, he doesn't have the faintest idea what he's doing. I said, yeah, okay. And he goes, and that's when Jeff says, well, he called me in. He wants to hire you. And I said, okay, for what? He goes, well, he bought this vineyard out on Long Island. Now, I didn't even know there were vineyards out on Long Island. And I grew up on the Connecticut shoreline, staring across Long Island Sound my entire life at Long Island. No clue there was vineyards out there. So I sit there and I don't know anything about, vineyards and agriculture. I mean, I've done, steel and, semiconductor companies for the last, 30, 25 years at that point. And he goes, well, if you want any more of those paychecks, you're a farmer now. And I just kind of laughed because Jeff's a very funny guy. And I said, okay. So I agreed, the pay was very, very good. I mean, it was, private equity firms tend to pay very well. And so I went out to Lieb Vineyards and Premium Wine Group, and I found a company that was not Premium Wine Group, they were actually in great shape, but Lieb Vineyards itself, a separate company that they also bought, was in terrible shape. And I couldn't understand because they had sent me the financial statements and the acquisition documents and all stuff that I'm used to having, bought and sold, a ton of companies over the course of 30, 25 years at that point. And I'm sitting there going, why did they pay $12.75 million in cash for something that I could only get the valuation to at about 5.7 million? All right.
That's really strange. How did they get their investors to go into that, or do they have to pre-approve anything?
Oh, no. The only person who had to approve anything was Jimmy Neutron, was Alex Burns.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Okay.
So I was like, what does he see that I don't, that he sat there and paid, $7 million more than something was worth for the privilege of losing, $1.2 million a year. It didn't make sense to me. But anyway, so I started out as the CEO of the company. I rearranged the people at the company very quickly because one of the things you do when you look at these companies is you have to get the right people in the right jobs.
Yeah. Now you're talking specifically about the vineyard, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So
the vineyard is a separate company from Southport Lane.
It was owned 93% by Southport Lane. So it was it was purchased with Southport Lane's, cash that they funneled out of an insurance company that they owned.
But what you were talking about was the fact that when you were CEO, you were talking about the vineyard,
right?
Which was a independent entity in a way. I mean, was separated somehow legally, right?
It was legally separated as a separate corporation, but it was but 93% of the ownership rested with Southport Lane, which was controlled by Alex Burns. So therefore, Alex was the majority owner. Now the assets, Neutron, Now the assets were gorgeous. There was this, beautiful 7,000 square foot Nantucket shingle style home right in the middle of the vineyard. It's just gorgeous, But I couldn't figure out what am I missing here. And then I started noticing, money coming in one day, large amounts of money going out the next day to something completely unrelated to the vineyard, like $250,000 came in one day, $250,000 went out the next day. And I'm going,
and a hidden bank account.
Yeah, well, yeah. They were paying. They were so undisciplined at what they were doing is they were paying some bills for the vineyard out of a bank account they controlled at First Republic Bank in Manhattan, a branch in Manhattan, and other bills were being paid out of the local account out in Long Island. So it was a mess. So the accounting was a mess.
You did manage to turn the vineyard around. It was doing quite well by the time that you left, and actually even quite a while before that. But at what point did you realize that something was going to go down?
Well, I think the things started getting progressively odder, more odd and stranger. At the August 2013, I asked the guys, the two guys who ran Jimmy Neutron and his partner, about some very odd, cash transactions. And, clearly I had hit a nerve because then they tried to give me a raise and more responsibility at Southport Lane and, look at other companies that they owned. And, I was sitting there and kind of knew I was being bought off, but I went with it. I agreed to it, and it was like, okay, well, let's see where this goes. So that happened. And then a few weeks later, a friend of mine comes in. We were going to Southport. I had introduced, because I still think Southport Lane's a normal private equity firm, just got some odd quirks to it at this point. And my friend, who is a very smart guy, and everybody that knows him respects him immensely. He's a to the point, Midwestern guy, number one in his class at Northwestern Business School. He sits there and he has this company. Burns in maybe a 10-minute pitch by this guy, sits there, commits $15 million, looks at me and goes, okay, Richard, you run the deal. And as Burns again turns on his heel and starts to just walk right out without saying goodbye, my friend goes, Alex, just one thing before you go. He goes, how did you get to own all these insurance companies? And Alex Burns spins on his heel right back into the conference room, looks at all of us. At that point, it's, myself, Jeff Leach, and our friend Brad. And he says, Jesus with a telescope on Mars couldn't figure out how I did this.
Oh, my God.
And the three of us
are after that, right?
Well, we just, we kind of ran out of the building and broke up laughing on the street corner, But, at that point, I'm kind of hooked. I'm one of those guys that, I got to look under the rock. I got to find out what the story is. So I started digging. And then I realized that these guys had been filing documents with the Securities Exchange Commission. I read the documents. Some of them specifically referenced the vineyard, saying, but what the documents were promising in order to get investors, additional investors, these guys weren't doing. So, they were promising that, they were secured by assets of the vineyard, and they weren't. They just threw the $12.75 million in, and then everybody wanted to know when they could stay at the house and drink the wine for free. So all those things started happening, and it was getting kind of weird. And I sat there, and I needed $250,000 to get the vineyard through the wintertime because, it's a seasonal business. It's agriculture, and while there are winery tasting rooms, they don't do much business in a summer tourist spot in January. I mean,
Correct. Yeah.
so we needed money to get through. And Alex is sitting across from me, and he looks at me, and I can't say it in polite company, but he says, oh F word, oh F word, oh F word, and he sits there, and I go, and I looked at him, I go, what's the matter, kid? And he goes, because at that point, I just kind of forgot that he was actually my boss, so I treated him like he was one of my sons. One of my sons was about 5 years younger, and he goes, I hate my insurance companies. He gets up from the table, turns around, goes out to the elevator, leaves the building, and nobody hears from him ever again.
So after he, quote unquote, disappeared, and I understand that he reinvented himself elsewhere and did all kinds of shenanigans before this all came to an end. But you, at that point, were, from the book anyway, I got the sense that you were determined at that point, I'm going to find out what's going on here.
Yeah.
And then what you found out prompted you to contact authorities.
Yeah, I was pretty certain. I'm not a lawyer, but I was pretty certain these guys had committed a number of felonies. And I had the bank statements that they had given me. I had the documents they filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I know these guys have committed crimes. How serious, what particular crimes? Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. So I went on this little kind of hunt. My neighbor happened to be an FBI agent, and I just kind of pigeonholed him at the town dump one Sunday. And and so but he was working the Boston Marathon bombing, so he couldn't do it, but he introduced me to his white collar group. Then I didn't hear from that group for, 6 months. So I contacted a private investigator in New York that I knew and I'd been introduced to by a friend, and that private investigator's name is Bo Dietl. Now, a lot of people know Bo Dietl. He's a very New York character, a former cop, but he's also an actor and has been in a lot of big movies and things like that. So,
I looked him up. Yeah, I recognized his face.
Yeah, and his gravelly voice, and you hear him on on the radio and on TV. And I had known of Bo for probably 15 plus years, and I hired Bo and his firm, and we did a deep dive on everything, and it was their conclusion, yes, this was a felony. And I was like, okay, now I'm like, I wanted somebody to confirm there was a felony. You just can't go to your lawyers and things like that and say, hey, I might be involved in a felony. I mean, because and at this point I'm sitting there going, I don't want to be on the wrong side of this. Mm-hmm. And I liked my paycheck. Going out to Long Island every week for 2 or 3 days and living in that big, beautiful 8,000 square foot house was lovely. I came home every week with some wine I bought at a very good discount. But I didn't want. So I wanted to protect this. And my oldest son is starting college. My youngest son is, looking at colleges, and so I didn't want. I wanted to protect my paycheck.
I agree with that, but you were such a bulldog in terms of getting to the heart of this, and regardless of your paycheck, you were going to go in for what was right on that. You didn't want your name sullied, and you didn't want it to happen. So,
that's true.
You didn't want it to continue, I should say. So what you exerted so much patience with this, but then one day you were contacted. It was by the FBI, correct?
Well, after Bo Dietl's, when they came to the conclusion that there were several crimes, they contacted the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York at the time, who was Preet Bharara, and they got waived off, which was a very odd thing, because this is at this time I think it's a 35, maybe $40 million fraud. I don't know the total extent of it, and so we decide that we need to hire a former assistant U.S. attorney, and Bo recommends a guy, Michael Weinstein, at Cole Schatz in New Jersey. Michael and I turned out to be, one of my closest confidants and such a wonderful friend throughout this whole thing. But Michael
he was steady, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he really complimented you.
Well,
in terms of commitment and protection.
Yeah. He was. He basically. I mean, he's a criminal defense attorney. He's used to having clients in handcuffs. I mean, I don't know how many, guys like me in my position that he had, but he calls me one day, and Michael's a pretty smooth and restrained character.
Correct. Yeah, I got
and
that impression.
And all of a sudden, it just I'm in the car, and it just comes out, and he's like, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Well, Michael, I'm driving." And he goes, "I just got off the phone with the FBI. There's a whole huge task force based out of the main justice office in Washington. The SEC's involved, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission's involved, the FBI's involved, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division's involved." He goes, "This is huge, Richard. I just got off the phone with the lead investigative agent for the FBI, and he wants to meet you." I'm like,
so
okay.
You sort of became this mole in the company, right?
Yeah, because after Michael said that, he goes, "But the FBI has one question for you." I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "Will you wear a wire?"
Now, here's where you and I differ. If somebody said that to me, I might have said yes or no, but I would have walked into that business going, "Oh God, don't talk to me. I'm wired up." I mean, I would have it all over my face, right?
Right.
And you sort of kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a little bit of, I'm not adverse to risk. And, I certainly enjoy the adrenaline that comes with doing some of those things, and I don't get frightened, before. Well, the first time I got very frightened. I had a massive panic attack in a hotel room, and but that passed, and so I went. Yeah, so I went and I met with the FBI. They asked me the same thing. After 2 hours of a conversation, they asked me the same thing. Would you wear a wire? I said yes, and they said, because they're at that point they're just kind of testing me out. They're kind of probing to see what kind of person I am.
Correct. Yeah.
And they go, "How do you feel about being called a snitch?" This goes into your mole comment. And I said, "Well, I'm not a snitch." I said, "If I was a snitch, I'd have been a part of the conspiracy to begin with, but bolted and went to the authorities because I didn't want to get caught, or I didn't want to, I wanted to sit there and cut a deal to get myself out of it." I said, "I didn't know anything about this. I'm learning every day as I go what's going on. So I'm not a snitch."
Mm-hmm.
And I maintain that to this day. I mean, I wasn't, I've had a couple people online call me, say that about me and everything like that. I'm like, well, you don't know the difference between a snitch and, basically what, a whistleblower. So, so I wound up doing that with the FBI. The first time was terrible. Actually, doing it wasn't terrible, because you get incredibly focused, your adrenaline surging. And, it's almost like, I walked in, it's almost like time starts to slow down as you're walking in, so I just, I was hyper focused, not nervous. And, it was, after a while, you just kind of get used to it, and and you've got, and by the way, just for your audience's viewpoint, it's not a wire, just so you know. It doesn't, it can look like anything. It can look like a cell phone. It can look like a belt buckle. It can look like a tie clip. It can look like, a pen. There's
what did the device look like that you put in your front pocket?
Oh, well, that was when I was at a dinner and recording the whole thing. That kind of looked like a cell phone with wires sticking out of it, and it was in my right breast pocket of my sport coat. And
Okay.
that's the only time I felt kind of potentially exposed. But that was,
And you
After a
mentioned
while,
having
you
a
just
cup in your backpack. What was that?
that was a camera.
What did it look like?
Uh,
I'm just
it, it
curious.
it looked like a Starbucks metal commuter mug,
Okay.
and it was a camera, and and it recorded as well. You have when you do this, you have multiple recording devices on you just in case one goes out.
Okay.
So yeah, so I did that 4 or 5 times, different meetings and things like that. And ultimately, it allowed the FBI to get a search warrant to go and raid the Southport offices. They had changed their name at that point, and Alex Burns was gone almost 2 years at that point. But they got a search warrant, raided the offices in New York, and that was pretty much the end of my active involvement.
What happened? Now they went to trial, or did they plead guilty? I can't remember.
They all pled guilty.
Okay, so you didn't have to testify in court?
Nope, none of that.
Okay. Well,
None of that.
I have two questions. We don't want to give away the whole plot. Okay, now in closing, I do have two questions. When were you found out by I call them the motley crew at Southport Lane? When did they find out that you had been gathering evidence against them?
I don't think they found out until after Alex Burns committed suicide, and even the FBI agent, because I had said to him, I had asked him, I might write a book about this. He goes, wait till it's all over. So I had to wait till it's all over.
Is the vineyard still going?
Yeah, it is. It is. They've been going. Let me see. I left at the end of August 2018, and it's gone. They survived the pandemic, and they're doing very, very well.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. So we will hopefully have you on again as a guest for our show, maybe in your next book. You never know.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
I want to thank Richard again. I know he is not on the line right now, but Richard, thank you for a great interview. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about this story, Richard's book is called Pirate Cove, an insider's account of the infamous Southport Lane scandal. It's a wild ride from beginning to end, and I swear you're going to go from cheating to insolvency to justice. Very satisfying. I purchased Richard's book on Amazon.com. Of course, you can get it on Barnes & Noble or wherever you buy your books, and on richarddbailey.com. Well, that wraps it up for today. I hope that you all enjoyed the show. In the meantime, I have to apologize for my voice today, and I'm going to tell you something that's a little bit personal, but it's kind of interesting. My doctor has been after me to get a pneumonia vaccination. And so the other day, I'm in, of all places, Sam's, and I went up to the pharmacy, and I said, "Oh, do you give inoculations?" And he said, "Well, yes, we do." And so I said, "Well, I need a pneumonia vaccination." He said, "Okay, no problem." So they bring me this little booth, kind of a funky little booth on the side of the pharmacy, and this guy gives me the shot. And I went about my business, and I was just feeling great. Until the next morning, I came down with some kind of respiratory thing. I don't know what it is, but that was not in the potential side effects. But nonetheless, my voice has been pretty crappy, and I apologize. I normally don't have this fry in my voice, and also I'm usually a lot more lively than this. So next week, I swear I'm going to be crystal clear. So that wraps it up for this week, and I have to tell you, I love the fact that I was able to bring a Sam Bankman-Fried story to you. And of course, Crazy Eddie. We'll talk to you soon, guys. Thanks for everything. Thanks for listening to us. Thanks for your loyalty. Mwah! I love you. Season 2 of One Good Thing Media has been brought to you by host and creator Gerald Spear. All things technical were fine-tuned by sound engineer David Dodd, and our announcer for all of our shows is Robert Spear. Our theme song for all of Season 2 of One Good Thing Media is Force by AGST.